American part of the world, and good afternoon to everybody else. I hope you're well. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, and you can let me know if you can't hear me or if you have a question on the chat option, which should appear on the right of your screens. If you click on it. And feel free to ask me questions as we go along, and I'll keep an eye on that box and get to those questions as I can. So thank you for joining us. This is one of many free webinars we have here at On Think Tanks. My name is Enrique Mendizábal. I'm the director and founder at On Think Tanks, and I've been involved in this project that we will be talking about. Dina Lomovsky unfortunately hasn't been able to join us today. She's had a family emergency, but I will be taking over the bit of her presentation. I hope I'll do it as well as she would have been able to, which is mostly the demo of the tool we've developed with IFAD. So the way this webinar is going to work, it should not last more than an hour, depending on your questions and my ability to answer them. I'll first present very briefly what this project is about and some of the key concepts that we have used in developing this digital dashboard for M&E and learning. And then I'll show you the dashboard itself. I'll sort of go over each of the components of the dashboard. I'll show you how to enter information, how to use it, and hopefully it won't crash and we'll be able to get through it all right. And if you have any questions at any point, as I said, just let me know and I'll pause to let you ask the question, or I'll just read it and answer the question right away. Okay, so let me start. Also, this video is being recorded, so this webinar is being recorded. So at the end of this session, we'll put it all together, and you'll be getting a copy soon. Let me begin with the presentation. Okay, so this presentation is of a monitoring, evaluation, and learning system that was developed for IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, who were very interested and concerned about their ability to track policy engagement at the project, country, regional, and global levels. This was done by a team led by Dina Lomovsky, with significant, more than significant inputs from Jeff Kanesevich, who took some of the concepts that we developed on M&E and actually put them into practice, and has, since the project ended at the end of last year, has continued to develop it, and it's increasingly looking even better and more user-friendly. And myself, working very closely with the IFAD team. So let me give you very briefly what the project overview is about. So what was the purpose? It was basically to help IFAD staff and project management teams to track activities related to policy engagement for two main purposes. First, to inform policy engagement at a country level, and second, to identify outcomes and account for changes that were brought about by policy-related activities. So what was going on? IFAD is a lending institution. 90% of what they do is just lend governments money, help them design projects, and then help them implement those projects. But actually, that 10% that where they spend time engaging with policymakers, engaging with experts in a country, is not 10% of time, it's 10% of their mandate, but they spend a lot of effort trying to build relationships, strengthen those relationships, inform policymakers. As changes happen in government, one minister leaves, another one comes in, they have to start again, build social capital, build credibility, etc. So there's a lot of effort going on into policy engagement, but they were not necessarily keeping track of all that work. And I think this is something that is very common for policy research institutions and for any initiative that is trying to bring about policy change. So a lot of work going on in convincing others that your ideas are worth listening to, explaining those ideas to them, even in informing your own ideas, but very little opportunities to record that as we go along. The system had to enable data for learning at the project, country levels, and for providing regular reporting and indicators for evaluation. So it had to help country levels, but it also had to respond to the needs of the institution itself, which had its own M&E systems. And I won't go into that because it can take a bit of time to understand all the requirements that an institution such as IFAD has. Now, IFAD had developed an approach to country-level policy engagement, sort of a theory of change, but not exactly. So they had identified that there were many ways in which they can bring about policy change through engagement. And this slide sort of summarizes it. Can I ask those who sign in to please keep their microphones mute so that there's no feedback, please? Thank you. So through things like policy forums, supporting policy analysis, identifying policy gaps and blogs, and drawing out successes to scale up, sharing experience from other countries, they hope to create a space for policy dialogue, enhance policy capacity for dialogue, enhance capacity for government agencies, pilot policy at the local level, and promote interagency dialogue. Those things would, of course, be supported by an effort to stimulate the production and utilization of evidence and policy process at a much more macro level, which would lead to enhancing the participation of smallholders in policy processes and enhancing policy capacity of governments. All of this, and their theory of change, would support and encourage the design and implementation of national policies that enable rural people to increase production, access, and access to markets and resilience. So there were three main things. There was the participation of smallholders in policy processes. There was greater capacity for policy dialogue, greater capacity for policy analysis, and there was in general dialogue among IFAD and the government, IFAD and other actors, etc. So we try to identify some of the key objectives that IFAD had across the world, and we realized that they were quite common. They could be summarized in fairly general terms, but it's still specific enough for any project, country office, or even regional program to aim their efforts at. So how do we go about this? The first thing is we looked at the traditional approach to M&E of policy engagement, right? And typically what you hear in a webinar looking at M&E for policy engagement, or a course on M&E for policy engagement, is that you have to develop a theory of change. This is what you would do if you were putting together a proposal, requesting funding from a donor or a bilateral, asking them to give you money to bring about change. You start with a theory of change. You create specific and very smart objectives. You select indicators to track progress. And you then, when you're implementing your monitoring system, you make sure that you track progress along that path. This is what usually happens. But there are a number of challenges in that approach. First, that is that smart objectives work really well for relatively predictable interventions, but not so well for unpredictable ones. And when you're dealing with policy engagement, the truth is we don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks. Often in some countries, some political contexts, we don't know what's going to happen in a couple of days. And so coming up with smart objectives might be interesting exercise, but they won't be very useful. The second thing is that policy engagement is not unidirectional, and it doesn't always happen directly with policymakers. So there's no one direction of travel or one pathway of travel or one theory of change that is going to work for us. And certainly it's not going to be only with policymakers. There will be lots of actors that appear and join in the story that we might not know of right now, but we will have to engage with. There's another point is that policy engagement is not always up to us. And there's an aspect of it being proactive, where we do things to bring about change, and that's the kind of things that goes into a theory of change exercise. But most of the time, it's going to be reactive. Most of the time, think tanks, policy research institutions, even large agencies like IFAD are reacting to their environment. They're reacting to decisions from policymakers. They're reacting to the agenda that is being set by the media. They're reacting to emergencies, etc. Also, while it may be possible to objectively measure one's ultimately desired impact, it's almost impossible to attribute it to our doing. And this is something we say all the time. I don't think I have to go into detail, but it's okay. We can measure the final impact. We can measure the poverty reduction. We can measure a change in policy. We can identify a change in policy, but it's very hard to attribute that change to what we do. Now, two other very important points. The process of policy engagement itself provides multiple opportunities for meaningful impact, but not all of it can be predicted. So by engaging with policy making, by engaging with policymakers, by engaging with a number of actors in that process, opportunities for further impact will emerge. But we don't know what those opportunities are at the beginning. We won't be able to know. We can guess probably, but that's not something we can put into a theory of change diagram or document and defend it. And then another point, which is very important, is that those who know, and those who stand to gain the most about policy engagement are those who have the least amount of time to do M&E. And this is something that if you're working as a consultant, if you are trying to develop an M&E system, you come across all the time. And for years, and this is one of the things we discussed with IFAD, for years we have been, and myself included, we have been getting excited about new tools and new ways of registering information, of tracking information, analyzing it, accounting for it, and putting together fantastic sort of lesson documents and story of change documents. But we forget that the people who should be doing this are the people who are doing the engagement itself. And so they don't have time. So we might be lucky to have them for a kickoff meeting, but we will be very, very lucky if they put the fantastically complex M&E system into practice, and they actually follow the instructions and enter all the information that needs to be entered for it to make sense. So we struggled with this, and we thought, how can we actually design something that is going to be easy, that is going to be flexible, and is not going to be too intrusive, and at the same time it recognizes what actually goes on in policy engagement and doesn't try to make it fit into a theory of change, a predefined theory of change. Because this approach, this traditional approach, misses this, and this is something we think is important. It misses the unintended objectives, and it misses the unplanned objectives. And so we want to make sure that whoever is collecting information is not missing these things. It's not missing what's unintended, and it's not missing what has been unplanned. Unplanned activities, unplanned unexpected outcomes, opportunistic outcomes because of something somebody else did, for example. If we only track our theory of change, then we're going to be biased towards trying to deliver that theory of change, and we won't necessarily be paying attention to all these options that will emerge along the way. So the approach that we proposed and we worked with IFAD is the following: so sort of linear in its setup, but not necessarily in its implementation. First, we need to set up something up, right? So we set up country level, project level, or HQ level policy objectives and projects. So the things that we know we're going to aim for, and the things that we know we're going to carry out: a project, a grant, an activity. And then we start logging in everything. So it's not that you have to log, but it's you're able to log. you're able to log an event, you're able to log a publication, you're able to log a meeting, you're able to log activities that happen, you're able to log even your context, what goes on in the context. You just log things in different ways, and you'll see this when I show you the demo. The way we've developed it is that you log it in through a website, so it's an online form. But it's possible to develop this so that you can log it in via email. You could log it in using a system such as Slack, for example, so that we can make it easier for the user to log information on the go, whether they're coming back from a meeting in the car, or maybe as they go home and train in the evening, or just on the plane, just put all the information into a table and then send it over when you log in next. And then at some point, you'll have to do some exercise that we call sense making. So at some point, you all have to look at all this information and make sense of what happened. And this is important because often you don't know what the story worth tracking is going to be until you've gone to the end of that process and you look back. And it's when you look back that you realize, oh, that story makes sense. Let's look at that one. Because this one that we put all of our efforts at the beginning of the project, that led to nothing. Nothing's happened with that policy actor. Nothing has happened with that idea. But there seems to be something else somewhere else. So every once in a while is useful, and it's very important to look back and try to make sense of what has happened. And you make sense of what's happened by looking at the information you've logged in, and the system will make it easier for you. You draw some lessons from that, and then you produce reports that help you, take things further, adapt your strategy. But it will also help, if you're at a project level, it will help the country level team to look at your work and give you some feedback and help you out. And if you're at the country level, the HQ level team will be able to look at that progress and give you some feedback and help you out. So there's this other element of sort of nested M&E and lesson learning that can help project implementation. So a few guiding principles worth mentioning. First, we think it's important to provide nudges. So we're all busy, and if you are engaged in policy engagement, you are going to be busy. So we need to give you ideas for activities. We need to make it easier for you to log in information. We need to remind you of what's the organization's broad theory of change, so you don't lose track of it. Doesn't mean you have to follow that all the time. It's flexible. You can add new objectives, but keep an eye on that. You need to give you reminders that it's time to make some sense of what's going on. What tends to happen is you collect a lot of information, if you do, and then you forget you have to use that information. And of course, we have to give you some tools for lesson learning. So it's not enough to give you a nudge and tell you you've got to sit down and analyze your data. I've also got to help you out in trying to draw lessons from that data and that sense-making exercise. It has to be flexible. Not every element must be complete for this to work. It has to focus on simple data capture. So current systems and work, so to use current systems and workflows where possible. So you don't have to create space to enter information. You can enter information as you go. And also, we think it's important to limit the information required for the system to work. Right? So you don't have to upload the whole treatise on what's going on. It's enough if you enter just bits of information, because as we aggregate that information, it's going to still be very, very useful. And it must be non-prescriptive. So you can do this and not you must do this. Because when we say you must do this, then we see people turning around and saying, well, I'm not that interested anymore. And their engagement with the system is not going to be optimal. Okay, so this is time for demo. And before I go into demo mode, I want to ask you if you have any questions for me. Any questions? Any reflections on the assumptions that we are using to develop this tool? Any questions on the objectives of the tool before I go into demonstration? You can write them on the chat box, or you can let me know directly. No? Okay, so I will move on to the demo. Okay, so what I'm going to show you so I'm going to show you the system itself, but I am going to start showing you the system from the point of view of a project. I'll go from left to right and show you all the different elements that the project level dashboard has. And then I'm going to move on to country level and then to HQ level. So this is so you understand. So if you are at the project level, you'll only be able to see some elements of the system. If you are at the country level, of course, you'll see more elements of the system because you can see all the projects that you have within your portfolio. And if you are at the HQ level, you'll be able to see all the countries and their projects that you have within their portfolio. All right, so this is important as well. If you are a think tank, you're a policy research institution, you do many projects, you might just allow a project to enter information and keep an eye on what's going on at that project level. If you want to have a look at all your projects in a particular sector, if you are the head of communications, if you are the head of research, maybe if you are the executive director, you'll be able to see everything. And so you'll be able to make connections that maybe your team, which is busy delivering a specific project, won't be able to see, but they wouldn't have time to look at anyway. Right? So those levels of access are important. But at the same time, it's important to note that you can be a bit flexible. And so within each level, you can add access. You can give access to different people if you think it's important for them to keep an eye on those things. All right, so let me go into the screens. Okay. Okay, so if you log in, I think I've logged in at the see what I've logged in as. I have logged in as country level, right? So I think this is it gives us a good overview. So I said I was going to log in as project level, but this has a bit more information. So what do I see when I log in as country level? I have a home, and a home screen gives me information about announcements. So if somebody's sitting at HQ and they want to announce an announcement to people around the world and say, by the way, this is happening in our project, or this is a big event happening around the world, I would be able to see an announcement there. What's happening, when, etc. I could also add announcements for my own country, so announcements that are relevant at the country level. And then I can explore the different countries that in my case, I'm involved in. I can add a team member. I can add a project member. I can set up a new project. I can set up a new grant, or I can register new policy objectives. If I want to have an overview of what's going on in my country, I can click here, and I should get a sense of what goes on at this country. And this country, for the purpose of this demo, is Uganda. So I can see the projects through the policy objectives that are associated to this country. So when HQ or we at the country level have set up a new project or set up a new objective, we've said these objectives are relevant to our country. Then I can see all the projects and grants that are live at our country. So Uganda Project 1, Project ABC, and then you can have a quick look if you want on this project. So you'll see the name of the project, whether it's a project or a grant, a short description, the country, who is involved in this project, who was uploaded by, date, etc. So it gives you an overview of the project itself. And then you can have also an overview of different activities and events that happen in the country. So, for example, the first one is local government elections are taking place. The second one is a working paper on agricultural development. There's an event here, which is a meeting with the minister. There is an announcement by HQ that says there is a new policy on things. There's a knowledge product that was published earlier before, etc. There's a briefing about it, etc., etc. And then you see who are the users who can access information about this country, so you know who is involved. At every single bit of information, you can access a little bit more. So you can see the title, the kind of product it is. You can see when it was published. You can probably have a look at its reach, its usefulness, which would be an indicator of how many people said it was useful, how many people commented on it. I'll get to that in a second. The country where it's relevant, the projects, etc., etc., etc. So this first page gives you an overview of what's going on in your country level in different activities related to policy engagement. So, but let's say we have a new objective and we want to make sure that that new objective is incorporated into different projects. So I can create a new objective and go to setup, and I can go to policy objective, right? And it gives me the list of existing policy objectives. For instance, this one linked to the Project Uganda Project 1, and I can create. I go up here to the main. To the top, and I say add a policy objective, and I have a doubt about current IFAD policy objective. I can look at this, and this reminds me of what IFAD, the organization, is defining as policy objective and our engagement theory of change. But say I create a new policy objective, I can give it a name, so I can say government capacity to use evidence. I can say greater government capacity to use evidence. Say, what level is this? Is this at a project level, at a country, at a regional level, international level, etc.? I'll say at a country level. It's active. I'm just setting it up. I expect this to take place by, say within a year, so sometime in August 2019, and I can add some notes about this, some further explanation. I can connect it to an IFAD's policy objective, country level policy engagement outcome. So what is this connected to? So for instance, identify policy gaps. It can be about strengthening capacity of the local agencies. It could be about sharing experience at the local level. So I can connect my country level objective to IFAD's global objectives. I can choose a theme. It could be about indigenous people because it's more specific. I can say that it's in Uganda, it's my country, and I could say that it's related to Project ABC, which is a project that already exists. And then we can decide whether it's part of a project or not. So part of an existing objective or not. And we just submit it. And then you'll see that there is a new policy objective which is part of Project ABC. Right? So there's a new policy objective in the list, and I can have a look at that as well. Right. I can do the same with projects and grants. I can create a new project and grant. So I can add an IFAD project, or I can add an IFAD grant. In this case, there are two different ways in which IFAD works. So anyway, but I won't go into that detail. I can have a look at the project if I'm interested with this view option, and I can edit projects along the way as well. So if you're at the country level, you can do all of this. But let's say we've started already. We are now implementing our work. We are meeting people. We are having conversations. We're producing analysis. I want to record these things. And this is where the third tab comes in, which is track activities and context. What this is going to allow me to do to enter information, events and meetings, what we're calling knowledge products, and then tracking context. Through each one in some detail, but I think it'll be self-explanatory. So one of the things you'll be doing a lot if you're trying to engage in policymaking processes is you're going to have lots of meetings, and you're going to go to lots of events. And you want to keep track of these things. And you want to keep track of them not just as a note on your personal diary or your agenda, but you want to be able to connect things to each other. So let's say that you've gone to a meeting. So for example, so I want to add a new meeting or event. So let's say I went to a workshop to develop new national policy. I was invited to this workshop to develop a new national policy at the Ministry of Agriculture, so I can add a detail. I'd ask to workshop, etc. We met so and so. We presented our paper on XYZ, and then etc. You can add detail about what happened at that workshop. You can select the type of event this was. So it was a workshop. You can say when it happened. So that was on the 15th. How many people attended? There were 25 of us. Where did it take place? It took place at the Ministry of Agriculture. Because I'm in Uganda, it's relevant to Uganda. Does it relate to any project? Yes, it relates to Project Uganda 1. And what policy objectives were? Capacity to use evidence, but also to the Uganda project sub-objective 1. It relates to a couple of policy objectives. Was this an important event? Do I want to highlight it so it appears on my dashboard? Not that important. It was useful, but not the one I want reminded about. Do I want to allow other IFAD staff to access? Yes. Do I want to allow project level staff to access this? No, I don't want them to access this, because this is a discussion that I'm having at the country level office, and so I'm going to keep this just to the country level team, and I submit this event. And so I've now created a new event, which you can see events and meetings you have already added. It says workshop to develop a new national policy, and so there is a new event there that has been created. And I can do exactly the same thing with a knowledge product. I can add information, add a new knowledge product. So you can see there's a working paper in agricultural development. I can have a look, see what this is about. If there was a link, I could link to that paper. It tells me about my audience, indicators of reach, etc., etc. But I can create a new knowledge product. So for example, I can create a product which I'm going to call tourism impact on jobs. I can add details about this work. The type of product this is, it's a poster, for example. I can add the link to this project, to this poster. It's on our website. It was published just yesterday, on Friday. It's a big launch. And I can add some indicators of reach. For example, we had 5,000 downloads. And now this information is linked to your and then you can say how useful it was. Well, we had a request to print and stick on walls of Ministry of Tourism. That's a nice indicator of how useful this was. Where was this impacted? In Uganda. This is related to Project ABC. It's related to this objective. And I don't want to highlight the product, and I want to give others access, so I submit. And then I've created a new knowledge product, which is tourism impact on jobs. So I can do the same with loads of other activities, working papers, journal articles, op-eds, media appearances. So what we call knowledge product is very broad. but it just gives me the opportunity to record all of these products. And the third thing that I can record in this is context. So we said in my presentation that we need to keep an eye on context. So we do it this way. So, for example, I recorded earlier today that there are local elections in Uganda, and that would change everything. Who's in charge? So I can have a look at what the chief information about. If I want more information about that particular event in the context, I can simply go to edit, and it will allow me to edit information, so I can add more information. You can debate have appeared, or national authority has banned largest party from participating. So these are important bits of information that I can add to my existing event, right? And I can just submit. Or I can create a new one. I can create a new bit of context, and the same. I can link it to the different projects. I can link it to objectives as well. So for Uganda, I'm able to link this context, this context event, to a project or not, or I can link it to an objective or not. Right. So that the way the system, in a way, is going to know that this event is particularly important to the achievement of this particular objective. So I've got to keep an eye on that event, on that context event, because it'll explain why I may be able to achieve or not my objectives. So up to now, what we're doing is just putting information into the system. You don't have to put information that fits your theory of change. You just put information into the system: events, meetings, workshops, knowledge products, things that happen in your context. Then at some point, of course, you want to start to make sense of this. But in the meantime, if you want to keep an eye on what's going on, you have these reports which will tell you what's going on at the country level. So you can have a quick view of your country level activities. So you can see objectives, activities, and context. You can have a quick look at project or grant level reports. So it'll allow you to choose which project you want to look at in greater detail. So I want to look at Uganda Project 1. So I can see what's going on in that project, the brief description, and all the activities associated to that project, all the objectives associated to a project. I can even see, kind of how much is going on per day, and whether it's activities of our own or things in the context. And then I can look at my user activity report. So I can look at things I have done, activities and context that I have added. And I can have a look at everything that I've been involved in, or at least that I have put information into the system about. I can look at all the projects that I'm involved in. I can look at which projects I'm a member of, look at objectives I've added, and the objectives that I associated, to keep an eye on the objectives that I should be working towards. And then we'll get to that in a little bit. I can look at all the sense-making activities that I have participated in. Okay, so this is useful because then I know what information I've put into the system and what information I might need to put in the system next. And then it comes when you're doing some sense-making and lesson learning. But we start with the bottom. We start with instructions. And this is important. So the system gives the participants, the users, instructions of how to make sense of all that information. And something that is very important to note is that this doesn't necessarily happen online. So there's no algorithm that is going to make sense of this for you. You have to make sense of the information you put into the system. But there are ways in which you can do it so that it's going to be easier. So the first thing, of course, is you have to arrange to meet and to come together, whether it's a country level or project level or the global level, because it's in these dialogues and discussions that you're going to be able to make sense of the different bits of information that you've added to the system. But of course, the bits of information have to be gathered, and so you have to put information into it. You've been doing it all year by using the tracking activities and content tab, and you've been keeping an eye on what you have and looking at your reports. So the reports are going to tell you what's happening here. The next thing you have to do is you have to make sure that you've associated all the activities and contextual information to relevant policy objectives. So if you've just added information as you go along, at the end you might say, oh, maybe this event was associated to this policy objective. I didn't do that at the beginning. That's fine. I can do it now. So you can go here and tap on associate activities and objectives. So I've just added information all year long, just events and publications and workshops. But I didn't stop to think about how those activities were associated to all the objectives that I have. So this is when you can come here and you can look at all the activities and you can say, oh, this one, I should associate this to some objective. So I can click on associate. So I think I did it quickly. So there's an option there. You can associate. So you can click on associate. It'll tell you what the event or what the activity is about. This is meeting with policymakers. You have all the information you need. And it gives you here the option to associate it to any new objectives that you think is worth associating. So, for example, to government capacity to use evidence. Or I might decide that I want to remove this Uganda subprojective one because that's not that important anymore. So this is the important thing. You're able to go back. You're able to go back into the things you've recorded because you have more information now. You maybe know things that you didn't know at the end, or you just carried out activities because these emerge as an opportunity, but you were not thinking about the objective that you were necessarily aiming to. So you can associate them at the end, or you can associate them ex post the activity that's been carried out. So you can do this with every single activity or event that you have carried out. And just in case, you have here a list of the policy objectives by country. If for some reason you think that there's a new policy objective, you can always go back to the setup tab and you can create a new policy objective again. Okay, so now we go into sense making. And what this does, it gives you two very simple tools. One is the after-action review, and the other one is the stories of change. And if you know what an after-action review, you'll see that all this does, it gives you the format of after-action review for you to complete. So we've had a very important event delivered. 400 people have showed up to this conference. We want to do an after-action review of that conference. So we can click on Start a new after-action review. You create a conference after-action review. Say when it was on Saturday. It was in Uganda, and it's related to capacity to use evidence. You submit, and then this gives you opens a window where you you complete your after-action review. You can do this, of course, with your team members, but you just enter information about what was supposed to happen, what actually happened, what would you do different next time, and you associate any users to this after-action review. So people who participated, people who should know about it, for example. I'm putting here HQ so they can know about it. And then you just submit it. And so now there's a new after-action review of the conference, and you can have a look at it, you can edit it if you have more information, etc. You can do the same with stories of change, and stories of change are useful to tell a story of how change has happened. So not just looking back at a single event, but tell something that goes on for a much longer period of time. So the same way, you can create story of change by adding story of change. You put a name of the story, the countries where this is involved, and then you just write the detail, situation before policy engagement, what is happening now, when the change happened, why the change happened, how the change happened, lessons learned, and who is associated to that story. And you just create that story. And so now you have the kind of information that you need to come together in these instructions, right? You use your after-action reviews, you use your stories of change, and you discuss them with your team, you discuss them with your colleagues to try to make sense and identify lessons for going forward. So we started at the beginning by setting up projects, grants, policy objectives, and team members. Then you start tracking activities, entering information as you go. You keep an eye on what you're tracking by using your reports. And you keep making sense of things by connecting activities to objectives, and also writing down after-action reviews and creating stories of change, which you will then have to use offline to make sense of things and to draw lessons from the process. So let me stop here and go back to the main screen and ask you if you got any of that, what you thought about it, get any impressions, and I'll go back again to that screen to show you some things. But I just want to hear from you. What are your impressions? What do you think about this? If you have any specific questions about what I've presented, etc. Any questions? So Eileen Martinez asks, is this an open source tool? We've used technologies that are freely available. It's not open source. What I'm showing you is a demo based on what we did for EFAT. So I can't show you the EFAT version, of course, because it's confidential information. But what we are doing now is trying to develop it so that we can make it more accessible. It still has to be customized per organization, but we are looking for opportunities to expand it so that it could be open source, or at the very least, it might be something that could be customized by a number of organizations in one go. So something that we are exploring, we are developing, but we will definitely benefit from feedback. Helen, with your indicators of reach, do you have a time frame for this? So downloads after 6 weeks, 6 months. Is this standardized? No, it's not standardized. This really is up to the team to develop. The information is there. So when you create a report on a particular knowledge output or knowledge product, you see what this is about. So if I put 100, so 100 what? 100 downloads. And when did I put that information? So 100 downloads by the first month, second month, etc. And they might be different. That's fine. We're trying to be flexible that way, because it might be more relevant to look at downloads after a week for a certain piece of work. Maybe they are an opinion piece about something that is on the agenda now. And it might be more relevant to look at downloads after a year for a piece of work that is more conceptual, that has a much longer term horizon. And Brightly and Helen also ask about resistance and buy-in. So let me address that in one go, and then Lizzie asks about feedback. Now, I'm start with Lizzie. We are now in the process of rolling it out. So slowly, some country offices are beginning to use it, and of course, we expect some level of resistance. But the way we designed this is we worked with different country offices. So we worked here in Peru with the Andean office. We worked with a grant in Latin America. We also worked with an office, the office in Uganda. We worked with the office in the Philippines, and of course, we worked with and through a team in headquarters. So we discussed with them what were the issues that they didn't like about previous systems or current systems, and we tried to develop something that addressed what they wanted, rather than we as the consultants and the M&E nerds were more interested in. So although there's always going to be resistance to change, we think we've addressed some of that by making sure that the system addresses most of their requests. Now, what happens if people don't submit their meetings and outputs? Well, there is an element of feedback. So the fact that if you're working at a project level, somebody at the country level can see what you're submitting and you're not submitting, allows them to provide you with feedback and say, well, you haven't entered any information for a while. There's nothing going on. If you are at the country level, HQ can see that, and so they can provide information. And the system allows for these nudges that I mentioned. So, for example, the system allows for an email to be automatically developed, or this can be prompted to the HQ manager or the country manager to send out an email to people who haven't entered information for a long time. Or the system can create a nudge, or you can be prompted to send out an email to somebody who has entered information about an event but didn't enter information about what happened to that event. So it might be, so if you've entered information about an event you went to 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, has anything interesting happened about this? Or you entered information about a working paper and a big launch about the same working paper 6 months ago, but you didn't link those to any policy objectives. So there's a bit of nudging that has to happen so that people who are very busy already in their work remember to, enter a bit of additional information by clicking maybe 2 or 3 things. Something that those that we talked to did say to us is that they appreciated if the nudges or those messages came from real people and not from a bot, not from the system itself. And that's something to take into account, because this is about incentives, right? If people are aware that somebody's looking at what they are recording, but not for the purpose of accountability, but rather for the purpose of helping them out, of giving them a hand if a big event is coming up, then they're more likely to enter that information. Is there a rule of thumb shared upfront, not only to include events and activities itself, if it has influence itself, but the aim of is to log activities and events and knowledge products wider than that? Yes, we are very clear about that, and it's important that in this particular case, the EFAT team was also very clear about that. And it's the recognition that you have to enter information that you think is important and relevant at the time. It doesn't have to fit your theory of change. It doesn't have to fit your programming. It's information that you come across, whether you were directly involved in it or not, that you think is important at the time. You have the opportunity, when you're making sense of things, when you're looking at your report, to go back and to enter that information again, or for the first time, or edit the information you've entered in the beginning. But we make sure that we're very clear about this point. Yes, does it have integrations with any systems? It can be integrated with various systems. As I said, there are ways in which this could be linked to email. So you would be able to enter information via your email in a particular format, so that if you wanted to enter a new event, you could do it via email. If you wanted to, you could also do it using tools such as Slack, which can be programmed to use chatbots. So it can give you a nudge to enter information, or it can ask you a series of questions, and then each answer to a question goes into a different cell. Basically, it's a database, and the dashboard is just how we present the database. And we think that, and this is to be developed, but we think that if we can develop this so that this is possible, and this is what might be an open source approach might work, then it will address one of the main barriers for use, which is that people are often fixed in the way they like to enter information, right? So we did hear from the interviews, people say, no, I prefer an online form. No, I prefer an Excel spreadsheet. No, I prefer this or that, right? So it's important that we integrate it to different systems, different tools, to make it easier for people to use it. Jessica, the tool is very alive to the policy-making realities. Thanks for sharing. Would you consider it being an open source? Yes, open source. Yes, we're not that confident with everything yet, so we are sharing it to get feedback and to get recommendations like these. Some funders and some networks of think tanks and some think tanks have approached us to go over the demo with them in more detail, and we hope to be able to try this out in at least 1 or 2 other organizations before we think about opening it up completely, so that we know that it can be customizable. Is the intention that a yearly aggregated learning report is shared across all levels with the entire organization? Yes, but not just yearly. And let me show you something else. So if I enter at HQ, so if I'm at the HQ level, I don't have to wait until the end of the year to get a sense of what is going on. So let me show you this. Share screen. So what you're seeing now is the same homepage, but now at the HQ level. So this is senior management in a large think tank, or this is a funder with a portfolio of projects. So I am able to see an activity report that tells me what's going on in all my portfolio of projects. You see all the different countries that we're working in. You see all the different events, knowledge products, and context-related activities that are happening. And I can have a look at everything that the different people involved in our projects have been collecting. So I can start to get a sense of what's happening as we go. I don't have to wait until the end of the year to produce a report. But if I wanted to produce a report every 6 months, if I wanted to produce a report every 2 months or 2 weeks, the information would be here for me to be able to do it. So are there plans to introduce a visual element to the dashboard? So there are some visual elements already. There are some small pie charts. So let me show you some of these things, for example. So country level reports. I can look at Uganda, and it will give me a sense of what's been going on. But this is developing, right? So the more information we have, the more things show up. This is a demo that doesn't show everything that we can produce. Let me just see if. So at the user level, I'm able to also get information about everything I've been doing, I've been working. And the more information I put into it, I'll be able to create more interesting visual representations. This is mainly a qual repository. You'll be able to produce reports of what indicators, numbers of downloads. Yes, so in each of the activities, whether it's an event or a publication, there is space for you to put data. So number of people who attended an event, downloads or comments. So you can add information to each one of the products. So I could create an event, for example. The event, has the option here. If you can see the screen, how many people attended the event. And then when I'm looking at what happened in that event, I can also put information about the effect that might have had. So 100 people attended the event, and in my Afteraction review of that event, I can comment on that and say, well, we had 2 people come forward, and we followed up work with them. What are the technologies you use to build this tool? So Eileen, so that is a question that I am unable to answer fully, but the main platform we have used for this is a platform called NAC. So you can check it out here. I put it in the chat box. It's called nat.com. This was developed, the technological aspect of this was developed by Jeff Kenesovich. And Jeff continues to engage with EFAT to roll it out. So, and that's kind of how we work. Dina and myself, more on the conceptual side of things, we developed the initial concepts, then turned that into a series of kind of practical processes and tools. And then Jeff took all those concepts and tools and transformed them into a service, a system like the one you're seeing now. That is usable and applicable. But it was important for Jeff not to, he's not just a technical person. He fully understands and has been engaged in the conceptual aspect and the practical aspect of M&E, and therefore is able to understand how best to translate those things into a system like the one you are seeing today. And of course, as we all always need, there is information about how to use the system, so how to use the tool, right? So it provides you information about how to do every bit of the process. It reminds you somewhat about some of the concepts. There's a series of how-tos which will be developed. And so there'll be videos here of how to use every bit of the system, and frequently asked questions, which the way we've set them up is that it allows people to ask a frequently asked questions. So if somebody is using the system and has any questions, and I don't know how this works, you can actually submit questions. And if you found an answer to that question, you can answer that question yourself as well. Yes, was that good enough? I just want to make sure, because I know demos can be tricky to show. I don't expect you'll be able to remember everything, but we wanted to kind of give you a taste of what this is about. And of course, if you want to know more about it, we'll be more than happy to talk to you directly and share more information about the tool itself, about the concepts behind the tool. And of course, if you know of any other systems and tools that are out there that exist that might do the same things, of course, do let us know, and we'll be more than happy to engage with them, to share with them, and to share those that you think do the job just as well or even better. We've drawn from existing ideas and projects and initiatives, and so we think this is certainly a collaborative effort. So thank you for joining us. We're bang on time. As I said, thank you very much. Thank you for joining. We'll be sharing this video later, so you can kind of go over the demo again. And if you have any questions about that system, that tool, do not hesitate to let us know. If you wanted to share this system, this tool with colleagues, with peers, with partners, please do. You have there's an article on the On Think Tank's website that should have been with the invitation you received to this event, which gives you an outline of the concepts and the application of those concepts. So please feel free to share that and keep in touch. Thank you very much.